VGC is supported by Patreon. Check out patreon.com/videogameschronicle for more podcasts, ad-free browsing, and extra content. Thank you for your support. Hello and welcome to VGC's review discussion for Elden Ring Nightreign. I'm Jordan Midler, joined by GameSpot's Tamoor Hussain. Tamoor, how you doing?
I am doing good, ready to talk about some video games. Also, I want to go back to sleep.
Yeah, that's fair. I understand that. And we're talking about Elden Ring Nightreign off the bat. My Elden Ring and Souls-like bona fides are not under question. Are you a big Souls-like fan, Tam?
I dabble.
Yeah.
I keep having this thing where people are like, you should play this one. You should play this one. You should play this one. And I'm like, all right, I'll try it. And I keep playing every single one. And I keep playing them to the end multiple times. And I'm like, well, I like the next one. I'm not sure. And then I play that one for like literally years. So just a little bit,
Yeah. Well, this is a pretty different one. Nightreign is a multiplayer experience. You can play it single player, but it's very much built for 3 players. The way it works is that each run, 3 players drop into the map. They kill bosses, collect runes, try to level up, and at the end of each night there is a slightly bigger boss. You do that 2 nights in a row, and if you survive all of that, you face Night Lord. Top level elevator opinion, Tam. How are you feeling on Elden Ring Nightreign?
I think that it is a good game that is enjoyable under very specific conditions and with a very specific mindset.
I think it is a fine game that sometimes approaches good, that is deeply frustrating, and at least in my personal enjoyment of the franchise takes away a lot of what I like about it. So we'll get into it. Obviously, it's a very different proposition. I think it actually kind of crumbles under some of the weight of being tied to Elden Ring. I wonder if it should have just been its own thing. But instead of making your own character, you pick from a series of classes that have some kind of unique abilities. They have like an ultimate ability. They have a more like a shorter charged ability as well. Starting there, Tam, what did you think of the class system? Because initially I was somewhat off-put by it, but I think it works okay considering the other opportunities you have to build your class as you go. I don't think you needed any more of that particularly.
Yeah. The abilities are kind of the main consideration when it comes to picking your class, as well as the primary form of attacking. So I think the simplification of the character growth and class system is to its benefit. I think it's got enough. It can't have too many variables, if you know what I mean. Like if everyone's going in there with completely different wacky builds, the game's just going to fall apart. I think there's a decent variety in the actual characters and how they function. I have stuck with I quite a bit because I think a lot of people don't like to play the range character. And I always feel like there's good opportunities for that, and there's good need for a range character in most multiplayer games like this. So that's why I went with the I. But I have played in the others as well, and they all feel good to play. There's none that I really think are like, that's a bit of a waste of a character. They all have something unique to them, unique gimmick to them almost. In fact, I is probably the only one who's got the least interesting gimmick, which is he fires a big bloody arrow and knocks everyone out. But others, and his utility ability is just a dashing attack that kind of marks an enemy to do double damage or a little more damage, which you can also use as a get out of danger kind of ability. But pretty much everyone else has been interesting to some degree. I can't say every single one of them has been good and appeals to me and feels good, but I will say they're not boring. They're not just like phoning it in with like, oh, big guy, he's gonna punch hard. Funnily enough, the big guy does punch hard, but like he's got other things that make him unique. But yeah, I was fine with it. I think it's necessary. I think too much variety could break the game in many ways.
Yeah, I think especially when you consider that the map is covered in points of interest, where imagine it like any kind of battle royale. There are things like churches and castles and little fortresses, and each of those, the churches will have an extra charge to your flask, and the fortresses and castles will have bosses. Those bosses typically drop weapons or other kind of equipment, and that's how you're building your run essentially. You will, if you look on the map beforehand, the fortresses and stuff will have a little elemental indicator. So if you're specifically building for that boss, you can follow that kind of path. But this kind of brings me to my first major problem with it is the map itself, because you find quite quickly that a lot of the runs that I did in this game felt very, very samey. I was dropping, I was doing churches, I was clearing out one side of the map before the end of the first night, and it felt like I was doing the same thing over and over again. I think this is hurt by the fact that the selection of mini bosses in these areas repeats quite frequently. And although there are environmental differences, which I actually think are kind of cool when the map kind of changes its form a bit, a lot of your gameplay time will be spent doing the same things. And I think that hurts it quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a downside to the game, the repetition element of it. But it's important to kind of recognize that repetition, for better and for worse, is kind of part of the genre. It's part of the kind of design document, the design framework that makes up many of these games. Like Hades has did you hear my voice break there?
That was a belter.
That was a good one. I like swallowed and burped at the same time and turned into a literal version of that kid Ralph from Simpsons. But yeah, what was I saying again? Oh yeah, it's part of the in Hades you do the same thing, right? You go back and forth, you're clearing, you're going through the same areas. And there is something about that kind of like goes into my first major kind of observation, which I think this is the fact that it's tied to Elden Ring is a boon as much as it is a detriment. So I definitely am like, if this was not called Elden Ring, would the expectation that it's repetitive be lower because they know that, this is a, run-based game. So I think that's a recurring kind of theme in my mind. But yeah, and also like you talk about, everything felt the same. It took you some time to get to that point, right? Like you didn't immediately be like, this is the same as the last time I did it 3 minutes ago for the first time. It's like you kind of built that familiarity, which is, and when it comes to design principles, it sticks pretty close to what From Software designers. This is I would say when people were coming at this conversation and being like, is this a From Software game? I think this hits every single pillar of a From Software game, just does it from an angle that is very, very different. But yeah, you build that familiarity. You're doing runs back to the bosses, right? Like the difference between this run and a run back in like Dark Souls 3 is one, the distance, obviously. But two, like you just picking up items on the way instead of having your loadout and running. There's been some really bad runs, like corpse runs in Dark Souls. I'm thinking of especially Dark Souls 1 before Nito, like that one's well known. But that's exactly what you're doing, which it has that element of it. So 40 hours in, 50 hours in, yeah, it feels repetitive. But you've had to explore that map multiple times very quickly, make many attempts at the mini bosses, died, made the attempt at the Night Lord and died. And you've done that multiple times, which is the meat and potatoes of the game. Again, I'm not saying necessarily that it's good, but I don't see it as a criticism, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do get that. I think for me, the thing that I was running up against was I felt like the progression to mastery, which is always what I look for in these games. And again, this is probably an issue with looking at it as one of these games, but it's difficult not to, considering kind of the setting you're in and the expectations, was the wall I was facing was always the Night Lord. The Night Lord, which are the final bosses, are extremely difficult to take down, huge pools of health, and require like synchronization and strategy that the rest of the game doesn't. And I think if maybe the actual overworld was slightly more difficult and trained players to synchronize a bit better, then it would maybe translate to the Night Lord slightly better. But towards the kind of the last couple of runs, as I was finishing off the last Night Lords, it just felt like the first 30 to 40 minutes roughly of my experience was very samey and very kind of, I just wanted to get to the Night Lords, and obviously that's not what the game's about, but I found that element of it kind of strange. What did you think of the Night Lord difficulty specifically? Because I thought that the spike is intense, but it's an intensity that like look, I did all of the bosses in Erdtree pre-patch before they made it easy for gamers, so I can take down a hard Souls boss, but at times it just felt like it was too much, in my opinion, some of the final Night Lords.
Yeah, I think that they feel quite spongy. They feel like they take a beating, and definitely fights go on for a really long time, which isn't to my taste. I don't enjoy grinding out boss fights. I can't think of a single boss fight in a From Software game that maybe lasts as long as a boss fight in one of the Night Lords would in this. But again, and I find that really annoying, because you're just like, once you've figured out the strategy, you're kind of just executing and hoping you don't get unlucky. And if you're depending on how you're kitted up, that kind of changes the strategy. So I get it, but also it needs to be kind of that way for 3 characters that could potentially get in there with a crazy powerful build. Like they could come in there and they need to have some level of pushback for three characters. It feels kind of closer to what they try to do when you play multiplayer in the Souls games, right? Like the bosses scale up to account for multiple characters. Most times in their games, when a boss scales up for multiplayer, it just outputs way more damage. I think in this regard, in this game, they've kind of flipped it, so it just eats way more damage. And as you go along, there are more and more increasingly difficult bosses that can take you out very quickly. But there's also stuff to speed things up, luck of the draw, where you have items that work for you, or paying attention to what their weaknesses are and building around that weakness. So yeah, it is. I wish they were shorter, but I also kind of understand why they are. They are effectively the end of the raid boss.
Yeah. I don't strongly dislike them. I think I don't like them at the end of the content that precedes them. I just don't think it leads up to it very well. And this kind of transitions into one of the main issues. And this is something we need to talk about, because I personally don't think if you're buying this as a single person without a team, you can have first of all, I don't think you can complete this game yourself without having other people on voice chat, but also it robs quite a lot of the experience. I've done a lot of playing it with voice chat and playing it with randoms, like the little pool of journalists that have had it for the past week or so, and I feel like when you're not speaking to people, the communication is just the kind of rudimentary ping system, and it doesn't work for me in that situation. I've never felt like a run has gone exceedingly well when I've not been speaking to people. It's just been maybe 1 in 10 is lucky and I get like a legendary weapon and that carries me for a while.
I've had a bunch of good runs with randoms that I'm not talking to. I think you're generally right. If you're going in here trying to play it as a single player game, like you have no intention of engaging in matchmaking, you are going to have a bad time. I never underestimate the Souls community. I'm so sure someone will be like, yeah. I've completed this on my own. I'm sure it's doable. I tried a few times and I got far into it and got Night Lords pretty decently down, but ultimately it was just like a battle of attrition most times. So I'm sure that those people exist, but generally speaking, if you're just a normal person of normal skill, or even a little higher, you're going to have a really bad time playing this alone. Like there's also not the things that would push you past that experience because you love it in Souls games, like the lore, item descriptions, that kind of stuff. You're not going to get much of that. Not to say that it's not there, but the structure of the game, which forces you to stay on the move and not really dwell anywhere, will rob you of that. So I definitely feel like you should not play it as a single player game at all. But I did have some runs that were non-communicative, non-verbal. I had some non-verbal runs, I had a few good ones and a few bad ones. And I can say with a few good ones, even though we weren't talking, the runs went well when one person clearly took the role of leading and just started going and knowing. So then if you're the other players and you have some experience, this person is building optimally or knows, and you can, if you disagree with something, you just take a counter ping and see how they behave. Do they run towards yours or they run to the other one? So it is doable. You have to have a team of three who is willing to do what's necessary and focus, and also one of them taking the lead. But in early days when I started playing it, for sure, I was jumping into randoms. One, it was difficult to get games because there's such a small pool of people playing it currently, which will change for everyone else and be different for them. But two, it was just folks not really knowing what they're doing, folks trying to like poke in corners of the map to be like, I wonder if there's any good lore over here. It's like, oh, the wall is coming, run. Again, not to say that's not in there. You can find that stuff. It's, it's in other spaces most of the time, Roundtable Hall being the main one.
Yeah, I did think, like, someone who's not au fait with Elden Ring and these kind of games, like, it must be an extra kind of impenetrable time. And I thought that transitioned into the bosses. So it's a lot of returning faces. They're kind of recontextualized, and they have different like health pools and stuff like that, and you're fighting them in very different. I was laughing at how often the boss just appears in like an open field. It's like an episode of like Doctor Who or something where it just always appears in a big enough quarry so it doesn't break. What do you think about the boss pool? Because I thought the Night Lords really cool, amazing design. Some of them, especially. It's maybe the fourth one, the Pest, we'll say. I think that has some like beautiful visuals to it. But like, I've fought enough Air Tree avatars in my life. Like, I thought they could have went a little bit deeper with who they got in those kind of mini bosses.
Yeah, I think the mini bosses are a victim of what you were saying with repetition, because depending on what which of the Night Lords you're hunting to kill, I think you get like a pool of the same ones that it picks from, and most of the time I don't think that pool is big enough to vary it entirely. And yeah, there's been, I fought a bell-bearing hunter many times. I'm okay with that, but like there's also been bosses that I haven't weirdly encountered that much, like the Centipede Demon, for example. I was like, why am I not fighting the Centipede Demon more? It's just like weirdly I'm getting other bosses. But I do think that it is effectively the equivalent of going into an area and getting only seeing the same three types of random mob enemies in a From Software game. But they carry more importance in this game, right? Like you're hoping for more from them. And they kind of are, they're the middle to low scale in terms of the types of boss fights that you do. These are the boss fights that you can do within the world. There's two types of boss fights in the game. Like there's ones where they'll just put bosses in areas that you're running through, and then you can tell the scale of that and the scope of that is going to be fairly limited. And then there's the Night Lords are all in the like, the Elden Beast styles set up where it's just an open area and you can run infinitely for the most part. So the smaller tier, the middle tier bosses, they could for sure do with some more variety. I think they are, like I said, limited by pool, and that is also kind of factored in on the area that they're kind of spawning in. I feel like if you add one of the bigger mid-tier bosses and you're in one of the areas where it shouldn't be there, it could really destroy the game. But I would like a lot of variety, which I don't think they're going to add. It's not like I think they've said pretty clearly, hey, we don't intend to treat this like a live service game, which I think in hindsight might be a mistake.
Yeah, it's kind of in contrast with obviously the tile set, if you will, for this game is just Elden Ring. Like you see like specific areas from that original game popping up all the time, just plastered into place. And I initially thought that would be kind of jarring, but I actually think it works quite well together. It adds to the kind of like unreal nature of Limveld, I believe it's called. And I think that so occasionally you'll get a notification saying that the world has changed and a volcano's erupted or a big mountain peak has appeared, and that changes some of the bosses that can appear, which is kind of cool. Again, this kind of fits into one of my issues is I would have loved to just poke about a bit more. I know that there's not necessarily the stuff there to poke into, although I do know based on the trophy list that I looked at that there is like actually one thing per map that's like a secret to find or whatever. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, well, what are we doing here? There are a few of those aha moments. Like I was in a castle with a guy and he wordlessly kind of led me through this back path that took me on top of the castle to find another boss fight. You mean? Yeah. And I thought, okay, that's cool. That's a level of those that is exactly the kind of path that I would have squirreled away looking for in a traditional From Souls game when I have infinite amount of time. But I'm always so worried that I don't have enough souls to get to like, so you have a maximum of level 15. Getting to 15 is pretty hard. I usually ended up about the 13 or 14. And I'm always worried that I don't have enough souls. So I'm like, I'm sure that's cool over there, mate. We need to run. How did you think exploration was handled generally?
Yeah, again, it is like you're right. There's not much to see out there. Like, and that's not to say there's nothing to see. There's definitely stuff out there. It's just you're not going to be surprised by what you find.
Yeah.
Chances are you will have one or two things that you're like, oh, that's cool. But there's not going to be. You're not going to find an item with a cool description that tells you what's going on. Your goal is to just grab stuff as quickly as possible and keep moving. I definitely felt that way to begin with. I wanted to especially after, you get all the Night Lords and you can go into different areas. I wanted to spend a bit more time just looking around and seeing what's there. But I also kind of had to switch that part of my brain off because it's like, again, this is not a traditional From Software title where the goal is to explore and take in the world. And I think it helped me that there was so much familiarity to do that. Ordinarily, I think that would be something I really struggle against. It's kind of like the idea of, when gamers run down a corridor in a video game and then it splits off into two paths. They do that thing where they go halfway into one, halfway to the other, halfway, and until they explode everything. There's no way you give one of those paths up completely unless you're forced to. And that part of it really annoyed me to begin with. But then as I kept doing runs and realizing, it's mostly the same stuff, just reconfigured in a lot of ways, I felt a little bit better than that because then it meant that I could explore the map. All that it required me to do was commit to not taking the exact same path or paths that are too familiar. So like trying to get different pathways through and going to all the icons on the map in a way that feels different from the last time was what really kind of scratched that itch for me. But you're right. Again, it's like another one of the many factors that will, if you're expecting another From Software or Elden Ring style game in the traditional sense, you're probably going to not have a great time with it.
Yeah, I feel mixed about it. I think that it's helped by there's a change to locomotion in the game. You have like a scramble and like a double jump because you don't have the horse, so you can move about, and you have like a super sprint. I think all of that's like quite a fun addition. Like I don't mind that at all. Although the super sprint destroys your stamina early in the game. I kept using the super sprint and then running in and be like, I can't attack. I have no stamina. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the way you get around the map, there's that stuff. There's also kind of spectral birds that can take you around. They're kind of awkward to control, but they do kind of the job.
They have a set path, so you can't really diverge from it. You can like maybe descend and go up a little bit, or just jump off.
Yeah, but that element of it, I thought worked quite well. Like the first time I got the Snowy Peak variation, we had a bit of time, so I climbed right to the top of it before it started glitching, and there was like one loot, there was one dead body with like a loot thing in it, and I got my first legendary weapon, and I was like, okay, that's cool. Yeah. The inverse of that is though, I'm like, oh shit, what have I missed? Like, what have I not been looking for? I've been so focused on getting my weapons and stuff from the mini bosses and from the kind of castles and stuff. I'm not looking at absolutely every loot drop because so much of it is just boiled prawns and you're getting so many different versions of grease, and the item pool is very small, but that's not too big a problem because I feel like it would have been overwhelming if they had tons more of them and you had to stop and be like, okay, what am I carrying here?
Yeah, most of the good stuff is tied to certain locations or mini bosses. So and usually if they pop up, if that area pops up, like the volcano area, for example, the volcano eruption is really cool.
Yeah.
But then that down there is a boss that will guarantee you a gold drop. So you just start factoring that in. The first time through, obviously, you're trying to find it. But once you lock down that kind of route, I can see the volcano area, the underground volcano area. I know exactly what bosses are there, and it's worth it to get this thing. And then that strategy might not work as well for another Night Lord. Even though the volcano pops up, you might be like, don't need that. It is that same kind of like familiarity building, even in areas where, it should be much cooler than you expect.
there's later Night Lords. I won't be specific, but there's later Night Lord runs where there'll be things that affect you just randomly. You'll be like teleported to a random fight out of nowhere. That is kind of like that is pretty interesting. That one of the previous Night Lords will appear in a different context in another run, which is cool.
Yeah, and then like I was playing yesterday with Blessing and Andy, and out of nowhere, like it happens quite not frequently, but it is enough to not be like completely over surprised by it, but also it happens just rare enough that it's cool, is when the Fell Omen just suddenly appears and it's like, what up, it's me, I'm here to kick your ass. And he pursues you. He'll like teleport between your characters if you try and run away and kill you quickly. And what effectively happens is you have to fight him if you want him to stop chasing you. But if you run or like you die enough times and revive and come back, eventually he'll just be like, you are ass, I'm out of here, and leave. But then it leaves you with it. He kind of curses you with a penalty of like you take more damage. So it's that risk reward kind of cool From Software design principle, but in a little more random of a way. But yeah, there are small random events that happen that are kind of like just X factors that can mix things up. But again, the effectiveness of them is somewhat tempered by your familiarity with them, and also the challenge of them is adjusted by the character you're playing in the build.
Yeah. That's the stuff that kept me coming back. We had an interesting chat the other day, and you said something that I think really resonated. I think this is a better game if you can complete it in like 20 to 30 hours. If you're stuck on it longer than that, then the cracks really appear. Whereas if you're only doing each Night Lord maybe 3 times before you nail it, you don't get that chance for the malaise to set in as much, although I still think structurally some of that is just baked into it.
Yeah, I think the strategy I would recommend to most people to minimize like all the downsides of playing this type of game and the frustration that might come for it is just attempt each Night Lord once. And then once you've beaten it, move on. So it's kind of like that approach, that just take them one by one. And if you can't beat one and the others are available, it's like Mega Man, like just pick one of the other Night Lords to try and beat. Once you've done that, it's kind of up to you how you want to approach it. Or once you've done it enough, successfully or unsuccessfully, you can make that decision where it's like, oh, this isn't for me anymore, or I don't want to play this anymore. And maybe that is, 3 hours in and you're upset about it. Apologies. But I think for most people, they'll get like maybe 10, 15, 20 hours out of it and be like, all right, I've beaten every Night Lord. I'm probably not going to play this game again unless either one, they add new content, or two, there's a desire to from my friends. Like once I've done all of these, I'm not randomly queuing up in the way that I would like fire up Overwatch, even if I'm alone, that kind of thing.
Yeah. This is a multi-part question, so tackle it however you want. Obviously, part of the reason that it is based in Elden Ring was likely a production reason, so it's an easier product to produce when they can reuse a lot of assets. Would it have been stronger had it been its own independent world? However, if it was its own independent world, would the downside be, I just want to explore this in a traditional Souls way? Does the familiarity kind of forgive some of the repetition?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like it sounds like one of those things where it sounds like you're shilling for the company and you're like coming up with a real major dose of copium just to make it sound okay. But it is generally that. Yeah, if it was a brand new world that I was completely unfamiliar with, and I was being just ushered through it at every turn, I definitely think I would be a little more frustrated, even knowing that there's not much to it. I would want to see the various corners of it. So yeah, the familiarity definitely helps it for sure. What was the first part of that question?
Just that obviously part of the reason it was tied to Elden Ring was a production consideration.
Do I like it? Yeah. I don't think it's, again, the familiarity is interesting for me because I'm someone who replays From Software games repeatedly over and over again. So I didn't stop playing Elden Ring. So there's something in my brain that means that I can keep going through those areas over and over again and not tire of it. I don't think everyone's the same. Would I have been more excited about the game if it was completely new and different? Yeah, for sure, man. But like you said, I think it's partly that's the kind of design and part of it. But from a business perspective, it is a way to reuse assets in a very effective way and produce a game in a shorter development cycle. And it's a discounted title, if I'm thinking,
Yeah, I believe it is
correctly. Yeah, so you're not getting completely fleeced by it. But from a like culture perspective and business perspective, based on what I know and based on the reading I've done and the interviews, the times I've talked to like Miyazaki and that kind of stuff, this serves as like an important part of the development of that studio and also the people in that studio. This is the first game that was directed by the person who was effectively the battle director for Elden Ring. So this is his first time as a director, and that is something when I've talked to Miyazaki previously, and also he's done interviews. He's been very, very vocal about wanting to train up the next generation of directors, and where opportunities arise, stepping out of the way so that others can take a crack at it. Dark Souls 2, for example, was one where he didn't have as much involvement, and some people love it, some people hate it. The one thing that I think most people can agree is like it's a well-made game. And that person is now more confident as a developer and a designer and a director. And I think this game serves that purpose. And I also think that they are using it to kind of experiment with some ideas and try and make their gameplay systems a little more diverse, maybe even flexible. Like adding a character that plays like a Sekiro character and feels like a Sekiro character is cool. There's like abilities now that are a little more like bigger in scale. So I definitely feel like we will, in games of the future made by From Software, maybe even Dustbloods. Dustbloods. You'll probably see a lot of what's in here in that game as well, because they're obviously going to share resources and knowledge. But I think going forward, there will be future games in From Software's catalogs that were like, oh, this is because they did it in Nightreign. And it will hopefully for the long term be beneficial. But yeah, yes and no. There's good upsides and downsides.
Closing thoughts now. I think as I said, I'm not enamored with it. I've found a lot of frustration. There have been moments of like, there have been moments of joy and discovery and victory that are all endemic to that Souls-like genre. But it was weird because every time it served to be like a reminder of what I'd rather be doing in this world. I feel like I'm playing a Souls-like game, but it's like, not that the names are filed off or anything like that, but it's just different enough where it makes me wish I was playing a traditional single-player experience. You've made me recontextualize specifically there the idea of it being like green shoots for the future. There's certainly stuff from this game that you could pick out and apply to a future game. I just don't think it coalesces particularly well here. I think the repetition, which and a lot of this will be mileage will vary. Your mileage will vary based on who you play with, how quickly you get through it, your RNG, which is always a factor. Some of that stuff I had a worse time of than I was perhaps expecting. But it's not a bad game by any means. I just didn't massively enjoy my experience with it, and I think that it fundamentally kind of misunderstands what I like about those games. I'm not an audience of one, but you know what what I mean by that. That it's not the take on the From world that I want out of it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I respect about it is it's a take on the From world that in many ways is for some people going to be what they want, and for others not what they want. At least they're reinterpreting it in a way that is not as safe as we think it is. Like I was going to say, I would. This is better to me than another like small content expansion for one of the other games. But then I'm like, actually, I'd definitely take that. But yeah, I think you're right. There's definitely parts of it that are not for me either. Like I don't think this is a game I'll be playing long term, and I don't know what they expect. I mean, like they said, the expectation is it won't be that, but like I feel like I'm going to play it for a bunch of hours, and then I'll only really play it if someone wants to play it and is like, oh, can someone take me through this, or I'm just going to do a few rounds. Yeah, it is. I think that what's interesting about it is you can take some analysis or some criticism of it, everything you said, and kind of there is a justification for it and also an idea behind it, which is why this game is so interesting. There's so many things I don't like, but I'm like, I understand why that is that way. it's not hitting me in the right way. And then there's things that are like, oh, this is exactly what I want out of it. It's a game for From Software fans that From Software fans stand the highest chance of disliking, which is a bizarre way to approach it, but also an interesting way to approach it. I'm one of those people who believes in that studio quite a bit. So I'm like, I'm sure this will lead to something better in the future. That's not to say like that's the only thing I'm getting out of this. I definitely think that it's got more to it. And yeah, it's a game that I think I'll play, but I won't remember for a really long time.
Well, if you want to read more about Elden Ring Nightreign, you can check out my review on VGC. You reviewing it, Tam, or are you giving that to
No, I'm
Minion?
not. Sadly, I wasn't able to review it due to time constraints, but we'll have a review up on GameSpot.com. Or just like hit me up if you need my personal.
Yeah, you can text Tam at 077
0208.
Until next time, please consider supporting VGC at patreon.com/videogameschronicles.
Give them some money. They're begging nonstop.
You know whose fault it is? Greg Miller. His only advice to me was just keep plugging, and he's the master.
You know what? So. Just please, sir, can I have some more? These guys, they're just. I can see Jordan's shelves behind him, and they are decorated, but there's loads of gaps in between those figures, which could only be because he cannot afford to buy any more figures. So that is tragic, if you ask me. So
have you seen the nice Figma Millennia? I would really like that. Anyway,
anyway, donate to my Patreon, which is definitely for work.
Until next time, say goodbye, Tam.
Bye, Tam.
See you next time.